A gray Hyundai iX35 is declared a crime scene, along with a house that doubles as a garbage dump. But there's something weird about this car. First off, the license plate is wrong. It's been switched out. When detectives took a closer look at the car, they found the Hyundai logo had also been swapped with a Toyota one that was made out of paper. Police had been looking for a missing person, 17-year-old Pheobe Bishop, and this strange car was their only lead. Phoebe had been on her way out of town, heading to the airport to catch a flight. But Phoebe would never reach the airport, and she wouldn't board her flight. And the search for this missing woman was now on. Welcome to True Crime Stories. If you're new here, I'm your host, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week, often multiple times a week. So if you're interested in classic true crime, hit that subscribe button. It's 100% free and just lets you know when I post new cases. Phoebe Bishop, better known as Fee by her mom, Kylie Johnson, was born in Queensland, Australia. Phoebe was a lively, charismatic, and sassy young girl, as her mom, Kylie, states, and she kind of followed her own beat to life. Phoebe loved cars and traveling, and according to her boyfriend, 18-year-old Levi, she was very much into photography, so much so that Levi had bought her a digital camera and was going to give it to her the next time they met. Now, Phoebe had a complicated history with her family. Although we don't really know the details, at the time of this case, she wasn't actually living with her parents. It's reported that she didn't really have a stable childhood and that she and her sister Kaylee were working as cleaners in the National Disability Insurance Scheme, or the NDIS. Now, it's not confirmed whether Phoebe had a disability or not, but one of the requirements for working in the NDIS is that the person should have a disability caused by a permanent impairment. But ultimately, that's neither here nor there. According to Phoebe's sister Kaylee, the sisters were just looking for places to live together. But eventually, Phoebe moved out of the family home alone, and she ended up living with two housemates, a man named James Wood and a woman named Tanika Bromley, in a house in Gengin. Now, I want to stress that Phoebe didn't personally know Tanika and James. It was actually Phoebe's mom who previously worked with Tanika. So Phoebe and her two housemates, who were more acquaintances or strangers to her, were now living in a house in Gengin. And even though Phoebe had moved out of her family home, she still kept in touch with her mom and siblings all the time. Regardless of living with a couple of people that she barely knew, Phoebe made the best of the situation and largely didn't seem bothered by the arrangement. But that sentiment would quickly change, because one day, in May of 2025, completely out of the blue, Phoebe disappeared, never to be seen again. Prior to her disappearance, Phoebe actually had plans to meet her boyfriend Levi in Western Australia. Phoebe was fond of traveling, and she wanted to explore more places outside of the rural town of Gengin. Phoebe even said in various social media posts that Gengin was a sad place and she didn't belong here. So she'd packed her bags for her flights from Bundaberg to Brisbane and then to Western Australia. Phoebe was last seen on the morning of May 15th, 2025 at about 8:30 a.m. Security footage caught Phoebe carrying her luggage at Airport Drive in Bundaberg. She was wearing a green tank top and gray sweatpants. You would think that if she was so close to the airport that she would have made it. But when the Queensland police checked the flight records, Phoebe hadn't checked in for her flight to Western Australia, and she'd not been seen since. 17-year-old Phoebe was then reported missing on May 18th after she failed to answer her phone or reply to texts from her family. The detectives immediately launched an investigation for a missing person, and they decided to look into the details because, well, nothing made sense. This was all so sudden, and it was a relatively safe place, all things considered. So this whole situation was just bizarre. She was on her way to the airport. She was literally minutes away from that airport, but she never arrived at the terminal. She didn't check her luggage in, she didn't get her boarding pass. The investigators checked every single piece of security footage at that airport, just to see if they missed Phoebe by any chance, but there was no sign of her. So the Queensland police decided to backtrack a bit and look into the footage of Phoebe on Airport Drive. And that was when they uncovered more details. Phoebe was seen being driven in a gray Hyundai iX35. Now, this was the exact same type of car that Phoebe's housemates had, so it's assumed they must have been the ones driving her that day. So they decided to give them a visit and just ask some routine questions. But when they reached that house in Gengin, something was wrong. It was as if they walked into a pile of filth. This house did not look like a house, it looked like a makeshift garbage dump. To put it plainly, this place was barely even habitable. It was just gross. The front of the house was piled with trash, and it looked like it hadn't been picked up in weeks, if not maybe even months. Little did the investigators know, though, the inside of the house would be much worse and even more disgusting. Something was amiss, and the detectives had a very bad feeling about all of this. Upon knocking on the door to this disgusting house, the police were greeted by 34-year-old James Wood and 33-year-old Tanika Bromley, and they were pretty cooperative with the detectives, at least in the beginning. They told the investigators at around 8:30 a.m. Tanika and James had driven Phoebe to the airport, and when they were about 1 kilometer or so away from the actual terminal, Phoebe received a phone call from Levi, her boyfriend. According to James and Tanika, Phoebe and Levi got into a very heated argument, to the point where Phoebe was extremely shaken up and very edgy. So the couple decided to stop the car for a bit, and James and Tanika got out of the car to give Phoebe some space. James and Tanika claimed that after about 5 to 7 minutes, they returned to the car, but were stunned when they realized it was empty. Phoebe was gone, and so was her luggage. So James and Tanika assumed that Phoebe went to the airport by herself and caught her flight. They didn't bother to check up on her, to call her, or even make the short drive to the airport to see if she was okay. They just assumed that Phoebe had left, so they drove home. Now, this sounded as bizarre to the detectives as it probably does to you. I mean, sure, they weren't besties or something, they were just housemates, but Tanika and James were supposed to drop her off at the airport. The least they could do was just ensure Phoebe reached the terminal if they found the car deserted. Another thing the police deemed suspicious was the fact that Phoebe was never seen reaching the airport. If what James and Tanika were saying was true, then Phoebe should have been seen by airport security, or people just walking around, or even caught on camera walking with her luggage in a cab. But she wasn't, which only made James and Tanika more suspicious in the eyes of the police. Moreover, the detectives were revolted as much as they were suspicious, because standing in that house, if you can even call it that, was impossible. Even the landlord said that the air tasted dirty. The scene inside that house was even more horrid. Piles upon piles of trash, ripped food packaging, and dog food were found all over the floor. It didn't look like the house had been cleaned since it was leased months ago. The bed sheets were stained yellow, and the floors were buried underneath piles of trash. The investigators also found some disturbing things. Chains, dog waste, and dog toys were found across the floors all over the home. According to the landlord, James and Tanika had leased the house just 6 months ago, and they pretty much turned the house into a dump of filth, which, if anyone calls a house that, you know it's bad, like really bad. Unsurprisingly, Tanika was given a notice to leave the house after a recent inspection. Even the landlord was confused and repulsed at the fact that this home was in such a bad state. He even questioned how the couple could breathe inside this home, let alone live in it. But as the detectives went outside, they spotted that same Hyundai iX35 that was seen on the Airport Drive security footage. But there was a problem. The license plate wasn't the same. The license plate could clearly be seen in the footage, and it was 414EW3. But now at the house, the car had a completely different number, and it was 474BW8. And this was weird. What was even more off-putting and heartbreaking was the fact that sometime before Phoebe's disappearance, James and Tanika's neighbors complained about a foul odor coming from the home. And when the police came to check, several deceased dogs were found on the property. It was concluded these dogs had died of natural causes inside the home, which is just insane. Neighbors had also complained about the racket of parties and barking and howling of dogs coming from that home all hours of the night that kept them on edge all the time. It was also eventually found out that Tanika and James were dating, but according to James's ex, she came forward and said that James told her that he and Tanika had split up and they were just living together. This whole situation just keeps getting more confusing by the second. But to make things even stranger, James also owned a bus, a big one, and it was parked out front of the home. He was in the process of trying to sell this bus, but according to James's ex, at this moment, he'd been living in the bus rather than in the home. And can you blame him? I mean, there's no way a home like that is safe to be in. Now, neighbors had seen Phoebe go in and out of the house, but they weren't aware that she lived with James and Tanika. I guess they just never saw the two come or go, so they assumed Phoebe was living alone in all this mess. So at this point, even though things were looking odd, the police really had no other evidence or anything incriminating to hold James and Tanika accountable for Phoebe's disappearance. And so the couple was free to go, and the investigation resumed. By May 23rd, 8 days into the search for Phoebe, the detectives searched various areas, and for some reason, they focused on Goodnight Scrub National Park. It was actually Phoebe's phone records that led them there. They had checked Phoebe's phone history, and even though Levi had called Phoebe on the morning of her flight to Western Australia, later when Phoebe had gone missing, it was revealed that that phone had been manually turned off. So the investigators deployed specialist police, including a dive squad, to Goodnight Scrub National Park, as they wanted to conduct land and waterway searches. After hours and hours of searching, police were able to find several pieces of evidence that proved that this park was, from the looks of it, the site of a gruesome crime. Several collections were made here, and evidence was sent in for forensic testing just to be sure, but it was clear from the get-go something dark took place here. While waiting for those forensic tests to come back, the detectives also came to a rather interesting conclusion. The Queensland police were certain that some of the evidence in Goodnight Scrub National Park had been moved before the detectives arrived for their search, and this was really bizarre. They also searched the vast areas with cadaver dogs in hopes of finding anything of value that would give them some sort of clue about where Phoebe may have gone. Well, before long, they found something that would certainly push the case forward, but it was not what they had hoped. While the search in the national park was on, James and Tanika had a run-in with the law. See, garbage, soiled waste, and inedible food weren't the only things in their Gin Gin residence. The investigators had managed to find firearms and ammunition in the home as well as in the Hyundai iX35. So James and Tanika were ultimately arrested, but they were let out on bail. During this time, the search in the national park had expanded to its outskirts, and on June 6th, the detectives found something. But it would be anything but pleasant. See, on a back road surrounded by dense bushland near Goodnight Scrub National Park, the police discovered human remains. It looked like the remains had been tossed out without a care in the world, and no effort was made to hide the body. It wasn't even buried. When the detectives sent the remains for DNA testing, and the results came back on June 17th, everyone was shocked to the core. The remains were tragically identified as those of 17-year-old Phoebe Bishop, who'd gone missing just less than a month ago. Sure, the investigators had an inkling that the remains could have been Phoebe's, but no one is prepared for that confirmation. And it was such a devastating moment for the detectives as well as Phoebe's family. Since this is a developing case, Phoebe's exact cause of death hasn't been revealed yet. But if I'm being honest, does that really even matter? I know we all have a morbid curiosity about these kinds of things, but remember, this was a 17-year-old girl who was stolen from her family, from her friends, and from everyone who loved her. Her life was ripped from this earth for no good reason, and that is what's important. Well, the police already knew that something was suspicious, and they declared the messy and disgusting house, as well as the Hyundai iX35, as crime scenes. But now that Phoebe's body had been discovered, the case took a very dark turn. It was no longer an investigation to find Phoebe unharmed. It was now a matter of finding Phoebe's killers, and the police, as well as the general public, put their money on the very suspicious housemates, James Wood and Tanika Bromley. The most interesting part of this case is the fact that the suspects in Phoebe's disappearance were arrested before her body was even discovered. Tanika and James were arrested on the morning of June 5th, a day before Phoebe's remains were even found. Tanika was arrested first, and then James was taken into custody sometime later. The detectives also released body cam footage of James getting arrested, and he was wearing tracksuit pants and a shirt, and the detectives were seen telling an emotionless James that he was being arrested for Phoebe Bishop's homicide. Tanika and James were each charged with 1 count of homicide and 2 counts of interfering with a body. Following the couple's arrest, the case was taken to court, but the two decided not to appear for reasons that are unknown. I guess they didn't want to face the possible consequences of their actions, but we really don't know. They're probably going to prison regardless, and their failure to appear essentially secured their guilt, at least in my book. The thing is, since the case is still unfolding, police are obviously being pretty tight-lipped with this information. But that doesn't mean we've been completely left in the dark. In the most recent court hearing, more information about how Pheobe was attacked came out. The police believe that Pheobe was attacked in the same Hyundai iX35 right after she was seen on Airport Drive on May 15th. Although it's unclear exactly what happened to her, the detectives allege that Phoebe's body was moved twice after the crime was committed. Once after she was murdered, and then again about 2 days later, where it was eventually found on that back road near Goodnight Scrub National Park. The police also have evidence that Phoebe's phone was fully charged and online on the morning before the attack, but later it was manually turned off and it was never turned on again, suggesting her phone was most likely taken from her either before or during the attack. But there is one more thing. Remember the Hyundai car with the changed license plate? Well, it turned out the license plate wasn't the only thing that was changed. The Hyundai logo on the backside of the car was changed to that of a Toyota. But I'm not talking about a professional change, such as a different emblem. This part was actually laughable because James and Tanika really thought they could fool the police. The Toyota logo was scribbled onto a strip of paper and then stuck to the back of the car where the Hyundai logo was. It looked like a preschooler did this. And the license plates were also not changed, not literally at least. Tanika and James didn't apply for a legit license plate change, nor did they steal one. The vehicle was still registered to the original license number 414EW3, but the couple had actually used electrical tape and black paint to turn the 1, E, and 3 into 7, B, and 8. Now, I don't know if these two were struggling with mental illness or if they really just were this bad at pulling off a crime, but this is darn near unbelievable. I mean, how many mental backflips did this couple have to come up with to get up with this bright idea? Like it was their master plan of throwing the detectives or the investigation off, but obviously it didn't work. There's no doubt in anyone's mind that Tanika and James are most likely responsible for and are behind Phoebe's murder. But the main question is, why? Well, James did talk to the Daily Mail and stated that Phoebe had a habit of bursting out in anger and had even smashed their TV at one point. During that interview, it was clear to see that this man had some serious resentment toward Phoebe. But remember, these are the words of a clearly, interesting man, as well as a possible murderer, so take all of this with a grain of salt. That TV thing may have never happened, and he could just certainly be lying. You've got to remember as well, James and Tanika are the ones with the house in disgusting condition and deceased animals all over their property. They're the ones with the unexplained possession of firearms and ammunition. They're also literal strangers to Phoebe, so no matter how you look at it, the housemates almost definitely likely had a hand in Phoebe's murder. Also, police claim that they have evidence that Phoebe's body had been moved twice, and they allegedly have evidence that James and Tanika were the ones who moved it. When you tack on the fact that James and Tanika's car was haphazardly disguised after they were spotted on CCTV, the whole paper logo and electrical tape license plate thing, well, I think we all know what happened here and who's responsible. It's also alleged that either the couple, or at least one of them, likely abused Phoebe, because several witnesses at a local store saw Phoebe come into the store a couple of days before her disappearance and eventual murder, and she looked weak and hungry, almost as if she'd been held against her will or something. But what's interesting about these accusations is that if Phoebe had been held against her will, well, she'd been speaking to her boyfriend in the days leading up to her passing, so why wouldn't she have mentioned this to him? My only guess is, if this did truly happen, maybe she was just that fearful of these people. And again, all of this is just assuming the eyewitness statements are proven to be accurate. But also, the whole situation between Phoebe and her family, it's kind of complicated. I mean, why was a 17-year-old girl living with practical strangers? It's reported that Phoebe had a complicated childhood in the sense that she never had a stable father figure. Her family was always moving, and she didn't stay in one school for too long because of these moves. But why didn't she live with her mother or some other family member? The whole situation is just bizarre, and I'm not sure why no one has bothered to clarify this. It just seems strange to me, but maybe I'm just looking too far into it. It could be as simple as she didn't get along with her mom, and being 17, she just wanted to try something new. But Phoebe's social media was also a very sad depiction of what she was going through. Her last TikTok video was about having a conversation with her younger self. She also mentioned her dad at one point, and how when she passes away, she wants her dad to help lower her coffin so that he can let her down one last time. Now, I get this was most likely some kind of dark humor, but there was clearly some truth to the pain in those words. Of course, we can't decode whatever Phoebe was feeling at that time, but she was obviously feeling, at a bare minimum, sad and down. Phoebe's mom, Kylie, was very emotional following her daughter's disappearance, and she just wanted answers. She was active on social media and on news stations, begging for any updates on Phoebe's case, so it's really hard to tell what's going on in Phoebe's personal life that led her to leave her home and live with strangers in a practical dump. Added to this is the whole discussion about Phoebe's mental health at the time of her disappearance. Even though Phoebe's aunt, Cass Johnson, questioned Phoebe's mental state and her work in the NDIS, Phoebe's mom, Kylie, blatantly denied all sorts of claims about her daughter's mental health and accused her own estranged sister of creating a circus by making comments without proof or evidence. She went into this massive tangent about how her sister was basically just being a pot stirrer and drumming up drama that was never really there. I personally can't really make heads or tails of this, but it seems painfully obvious that Phoebe's home life was most likely not pleasant. And this bit alone puts into perspective maybe why she wanted to move out and start on her own, albeit with some very strange roommates, but maybe that's all she could afford. In the end, all that matters is that Phoebe gets justice, and that's what everyone wants, whether they know Phoebe personally or not. Well, on June 30th, 2025, Phoebe's funeral was held, and she was laid to rest in Bundaberg. It was a private funeral, and friends and family gathered to say their final goodbyes. It was a very dark day for Phoebe's loved ones, but regardless, they wore brightly colored clothes to the assembly because they believed that's what Phoebe would have wanted. She loved everything vibrant and bright, and she really just wanted to be happy. She was cheerful, she loved to sing, dance, and hug people, and her loved ones wanted to remember her in that same way. I really hope that Phoebe's case reaches a conclusion soon, hopefully as soon as next month based on the time of recording this video. We'll just have to see how things end up working out, but the next court hearing is supposed to take place in August. If there are any major updates, I'll do my best to touch base here and post them down in the comments, but I just hope that answers come out, the perpetrators get punished, and this grieving family can finally get some closure as to why and how their daughter's life was ripped away from her. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including MJ Kelly and Etta Penny. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public. And it's a great way to support the channel and help out. I appreciate each and every one of you guys that have decided to do that. If you also want to join, you can click that big join button below the video or find the link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also now available. You can grab one of those from a link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered. And don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.